Sorry, we're starting a couple of seconds late here with some Zoom issues. I'd like to call the Anacortes City Council meeting into order of 22 January 2024. Would you please join me in the pledge? Okay, first item up is announcements and committee reports, and I've got a couple announcements. So I'd just like to thank this. Oh, sorry, we didn't do roll call. Thank you very much. Yeah, a little behind with some Zoom issues here. But Mr. Franciac, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
I would like to excuse Ms. Hubick from today's meeting.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Cleland McGrath, a second by Mr. Walters to excuse Ms. Hubick. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, we're back on track, I think. Appreciate that. Announcements and committee reports. And just first up, if you didn't know, we had a little bit of a winter event, certainly starting over the weekend, last weekend, with the hard freeze with temperatures in the teens. So really started on the 12th, but it lasted certainly through Thursday. But Wednesday morning when the snow started to fall is when street crews switched to a 24-hour coverage, and they kept that schedule going until Friday. The snow finally turned to rain Thursday. Again, multiple departments. It's always appreciate pitching in to help the street crews with water, garbage, fiber, and parks all pitching in. About well over 440 hours, 14 crew members, 5 plow trucks, 1 grader, 2 backhoes, 1 loader, 184 tons of sand salt mixture, and 300 gallons of de-icer. So a lot of effort to keep the roads clear, and it was very difficult again because that hard freeze underneath, and it took a while. And the weather forecast wasn't exactly perfect, so what a surprise there. I'll save my comments for weather guessers for another time. Let's see, but with that snow event, I know some citizens missed their normal trash pickup day for Wednesday and Thursday, so those customers, please hold your garbage and recycling till your next service day, which will be Wednesday and Thursday. Set out 2 times your normal garbage, as long as the extra bags are tied and shut, placed next to your tote, and you're not required to use the prepaid bags. So that's it for me. First is the Housing, Affordability, and Community Services Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The HACS committee met last Wednesday, and it was a meeting primarily to learn more about the new changes in the coordinated entry program that, instead of being run by Community Action this year, will be managed by Volunteers of America. And they are mainly located in Snohomish County, where they've been running a program there for several years that serves 5 counties. And we had 22 participants at that meeting, which shows you the level of interest, including 2 people from Volunteers of America, George Kosovich from Skagit County, and a lot of other people from service providers and staff and interested community members. So the main thing we wanted to know is, what are the changes in the program? The main change is that the primary access point, instead of people walking into an office, the primary access point is calling a phone number, which is 211, and that will direct clients to check it, how they can check in that way, they can get on lists that way for services, they can find out what's available to them. Apparently in Snohomish County, they manage 53,000 calls a year. They do have a couple of office spaces in Mount Vernon, but none of which will have client accessibility to walk in. So what they're counting on is the organizations that have already been doing the coordinated entry, like Anacortes Family Center, Community Action. So There's still going to be a lot of work involved by our local people, and not everyone has access to a phone. So some things will be easier and more streamlined, and others we're not as sure about. They talk about doing warm handoffs of people that are ready to go. The idea is to make the housing interest pool that sometimes has 200 people on it work more efficiently, so they can contact people more quickly, have them ready to go, to move in when those opportunities are available, because as we know, those opportunities are not many, they are few. So to have people ready to go and like boom, they can get in. So that's the hope there. Another thing we talked about was the vulnerability scoring, which are, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but a lot of it comes from the Department of Commerce, a state agency who grants a lot of funding for programs. And Skagit County has its own sort of idiosyncratic score. Anyway, they're going to work to make sure that that scoring system is more consistent with scoring systems in other places, and that should help clients as well. So this program launches on February 1st, and people in need can call 211 at that point. And we are going to hope for the best. But again, there's still a lot of work that is falling on the shoulders of our local organizations, and that is a little bit of a concern for many of us. And that's it.
Okay, thanks. Next up is Planning Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The Planning Committee met just before this meeting. Ms. Moulton, Ms. Cleland McGrath, and myself. We talked about a couple of topics in kind of a free-flowing conversation. First, about the comprehensive plan. The periodic update of that is due by mid-next year, and we've got an agenda item tonight to talk about funding for that update. We talked a little bit in the committee about what the next version of the comp plan looks like. In 2016, we rewrote the comp plan from a blank sheet of paper. We are not proposing to do that this time, but there will be a wholly new climate element in the comp plan. There will be probably a complete rewrite of the housing element and new housing numbers that we are required to achieve as a result of some recent state laws. We talked in terms of capital facilities integration in the comp plan and how we can do a better job of having tighter integration with the public works planning processes and making sure that we have a full and robust 20-year needs assessment of from every department, everybody that touches a capital facility at the city, in terms of what are those unmet needs over the next 20 years, which is the planning period. We also talked generally about how we have, over the past decade, transitioned away from quasi-judicial processes and toward more robust legislative processes, and out of the quasi-judicial role of City Council or Planning Commission doing the work of judges in evaluating planning permits, project permits. And that has been a slow process. Deliberatively, it has been a slow process to see how it worked and what doesn't work and how we might adjust. So one of the things that we suggested to the planning department is maybe the next step in that project is to move shoreline permits, especially the ones in excess of $1 million, which have the most liability associated with them, out of the planning commission realm and put them in front of the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner was also a topic of conversation because at the moment it is not working well. The hearing examiner needs to be reappointed because appointments are 2-year terms, and the planning department indicated that they are likely to go out for an RFP for hearing examiner services in the near future, which we were very supportive of. Finally, we talked about what's coming next to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Department indicated they're putting our moratorium on short-term rentals in the commercial zones in front of the Planning Commission next. And then after that, the Planning Commission will likely have most of their time preoccupied with comprehensive plan update. Moving on from the Planning Committee report, I just wanted to mention that we are advertising membership in the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee right now. The Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, LTAC, is the group that makes recommendations to the City Council on distribution of our lodging tax revenues, tax that we collect on the purchase of hotel, motel, and similar lodging. Some of the recipients of LTAC revenues are the Arts Festival, the Downtown Alliance, the Summer Concert Series run by the Port, etc. Terms expire at the end of every year, so we need to reappoint, and that's advertised now, and it will be advertised in the Anacortes American, and then we will do a first review of applications on January 31. Following that, we'll send all the applications to City Council for appointment, because it's City Council that does that appointing. If you're interested, go to the city website and just search for LTAC, and you'll find the LTAC webpage. Under both state law and our code, there are two groups that are eligible for appointment to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee: either a person who collects the tax, a representative of a hotel or a motel or the like, or a person involved in activities authorized to be funded by lodging tax revenue. So, for example, the farmers market or the Downtown Alliance or something like that. Finally, today I attended the North Star Project's Housing Task Force meeting. There weren't any other cities represented at that meeting today, but there usually are. We reviewed draft changes to the county-wide planning policies that are going to be coming forward to us soon, that need to be adopted by each city in the county. One recommendation that we made to Kevin Murphy, Skagit Council of Governments, who's coordinating the changes to the countywide planning policies, is that we add a policy statement that our objective in terms of housing planning is to achieve a vacancy rate in housing in Skagit County equal to the natural vacancy rate. Because for a long time now in Skagit County, we've had a 0% vacancy rate, which means we have a market that is not very functional in terms of allowing people to filter into the types of housing that they might want to be in, because there's no housing available for them to go buy. So that would be a change to the draft and just a suggestion that we made. And then the task force staff, George Kosovich and Margaret Van Villay from Tenfold Health, both suggested that we start having conversation with faith groups about available land that they may have that could be used for housing. And as an example, Eric Johnson, former city council member and one of the leaders of the Community Health Council, his church is working on restoring the adult daycare facility that they used to have, because that's such a pressing need in our community. That's not specifically housing, but it's a correlated need.
Okay, any other committee reports? or
Mayor Miller?
announcement? Ms. Moulton.
I just wanted to briefly mention that yesterday I attended a housing and transportation forum up in Bellingham, and that was pretty well attended. And there was a planner there, a transportation planner who's in the industry for 40 years, taught at UW, retired, but there were a lot of good ideas tossed around, and there was a really good panel with a county council member, the planning director of Bellingham, and a transportation advocate, anyway, but one other person, but just different ideas about how to fix what's been done in the past, which is the hardest thing to do, and also planning for the future to really encourage and make easy the opportunity to use transit and bicycling and walking. And people will, of course, always use their cars, which is fine, but a way to make it easier to walk, drive, take transit, and walk, bike, and take transit, and make it harder to drive so that it's a more natural, easy thing for people to do. So it was a really interesting afternoon, and I learned some really good things from it that we'll be talking about in planning committee, I'm sure. So anyway, very worthwhile.
Okay, any other reports? All right, we will move on to item 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public that wishes to address the council on anything that is not on our agenda. I see a lot of folks in the public that are here. I'm sure many want to comment on some of the considerations for housing and zoning possible considerations there. But I also have folks signed up for, and I see you're already Miss Bill Turner. I have to pretend like I don't know you. So make sure the microphone's on. A blue light or
Gotcha.
green.
Green light. Gotcha.
There we go.
Thank you.
And state your name and the city, please.
So I do want to
State,
talk about
state,
housing.
state your name and the city also.
Excuse me. My name is Bill Turner, live at 2022 I Avenue, Anacortes, near the high school. And I'm not here representing Habitat for Humanity. I was past president for 2 years. So I just wanted to let you know I'm encouraged a lot by House Bill 1110 and what it's trying to do, because we're modeling what California's doing, what other states are doing, and we need to find places for people to live. The way that the new state law is stipulated, Anacortes is going to find, I think Anacortes is going to be it's going to be abrupt to a lot of people to find out they might have 2 ADUs in front of them. So we have a lot of work to do to sort of fight public outreach. I really hope you're going to do public outreach over the next year to incorporate this as part of the comp plan. But so we take this seriously, because I'd like to get housing in there, but I don't want to start a revolt. It's been very hard for Habitat for Humanity to get housing here in Anacortes, including trying to work with the city. And the problem is that the market here drives things up very quickly, including rentals in your backyard. And so no one's going to, under rent except to the relatives or whatever. So I hope we can figure out a way. I'm hoping that you guys will find an impact fee maybe in all these ADUs for affordable housing, to find land or use land that the city has to build affordable housing on. And that's a big, big discussion, how you do that. So I won't go any further on that, but I'm really encouraged by this. So I hope at the end of this year, we will have enough public outreach and public opinion to generate some really good codes about ADUs and fourplexes, et cetera. All right? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have Steve Anderson signed up. Okay. Again, there'll be an opportunity to comment on a number of the other items, hopefully later on. Anybody else wish to address the council here in chambers? Okay, come on up.
My name is Kathleen Lawrence Flanagan. I live here in Anacortes, and I want to just talk about 2 of the 3 proposed ordinances. I know the state is requiring...
Do you want to wait until we get to those?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Is that more
so yeah,
appropriate? That's fine.
we'll get to those.
Okay.
So yeah, items, I think it's
They're way at the
6A,
end of
B,
the
and
list.
C. Yep, we'll get to those.
That's fine,
Yep.
thank you.
All right, anything that's not on our agenda? Okay. All right, we will move on to our consent agenda items, and I did receive, council did receive public comment on item 5D, so that's been included in the packet as well. So, council consent agenda items A through F.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
I move approval of consent agenda items A through F.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall and a second by Ms. Moulton to approve consent agenda items A through F. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. So we are on to item 6A. Item 6 is other business, and 6A. Okay, so this is ordinance 4070, consideration of Planning Commission's recommendation to amend AMC 1941-40, principal uses permitted in residential zones, and AMC 1943, household living, to change certain types of from conditional uses to permitted outright uses in the R2 and R3 zones. So this is a discussion item with possible action, though I'm guessing council's going to want to hear from the public, and we'll have a discussion on that one. So this is, one more time, I'm just going to try to paraphrase this. This is amending principal uses in residential zones and household living changes certain housing types from conditional use to permitted outright uses in the R2 and R3 zones. And this is particularly around, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Grange and let you talk about this one.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My name is Libby Grage. I am the planning manager in the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department for the city. And that's definitely a mouthful, the ordinance title and the department name. So I am here to talk about the draft ordinance 4070. And our short title for this proposal is changing C's to P's. That's how we refer to it. And so the proposal before you is to amend the Anacortes Municipal Code to change duplexes from a conditional use to a permitted outright use in the R2 zone, and change triplexes, townhouses up to 4 units, and multifamily projects up to 4 units from a conditional use to a permitted outright use in the R3 zone. And there was a companion amendment that goes along with that in 1943-010, which are the housing type specific standards. And that is just a clarification to ensure consistency between those standards and the permitted use table. And I'll show you what that is here in just a minute. And then finally, the current proposal is to only change the C's to P's, and the current minimum lot size requirements and all other adopted standards would continue to apply to development of duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, and multifamily in these zones. This is the Table 1941-040, principal uses permitted in residential zones. So this is what the actual code amendment would looks like. So these are the different residential zones, R1 through Old Town, and then different residential use housing types along the column on the left-hand side. So you can see in the R2 zone, the duplex has the C for conditional has been crossed out, and we've added a P for permitted use. And then the same thing for the R3 zone, a triplex, townhouse, and multifamily up to 4 units would go from a conditional use to a permitted use. This is that companion amendment that would need to be made just to ensure consistency between the household living standards and the permitted use table. This is just clarifying some zone-specific standards in the R3 zone that townhouse structures with up to 4 attached units are permitted by right, and then crossing out the reference to conditionally permitted in the R3 zone. This is a zoning map for the city of Anacortes. It shows the different zoning districts throughout the city. Just wanted to point out the areas that would be affected by this change are the R2 areas, which is over on the west side of town, and then the R3 zone is more in the central eastern portion of Anacortes. So this bluish green color here.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Ms. Grage, given the prevalence of HOAs and CCRs in the R2 zone, is there a portion of that you could point to that this would actually have some effect on the ground?
I think that probably the a majority of lots are subject to the private conditions and covenants that limit development of lots to single family. So I know that probably all of Skyline is that way. I don't know about this area in here south of SR 20, but I think probably the majority of lots in that area are.
In areas that have covenants that regulate, say, for example, height, we could increase the height limit to 1,000 feet and still nobody could build
Correct.
to that. Okay, thank you.
And this is interesting to me, but I did some digging to try and figure out how many duplexes and triplexes had actually applied for a conditional use permit since 2011. In the R2 zone, I only found one, and then one triplex in the R3 zone since 2011, so not very many. So why is this proposed change being brought forward at this point? And that goes back to the 2016 comprehensive plan. The city council and the community had a lot of public engagement, looking at policies around policies around housing. There were goals and policies added to the comprehensive plan to add housing opportunities to address the needs of all economic segments of the community, to integrate smaller housing types into residential neighborhoods, encourage infill, and also to add design standards to improve compatibility of those smaller unit types as they are integrated into residential neighborhoods. And then in 2019, the Anacortes City Council adopted new development regulations that included new design standards for duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses that address compatibility with surrounding neighborhoods. In 2023, the Housing Action Plan was adopted by Resolution 3104, and the recommendation to change the C's to P's beyond what is just proposed in this particular amendment. There are many other recommendations in that document, but this is a recommendation that came out of the Housing Action Plan. So the rationale for the Housing Action Plan recommendation to make this change is to streamline the permit process and reduce uncertainty. The conditional use permit process can take a long time. There are a lot of steps. There are a lot of public meetings, and it can take upwards of 6 months to get through the process. A review for a building or structure or use that is permitted outright can be done administratively by staff. Staff looks at conformance of the proposal with the adopted development regulations, and that can be accomplished within 4 to 6 weeks instead of months. And then this is also just saying that the lot dimensions, requirements, standards for open space, parking configuration, all of these design requirements for duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses help ensure compatibility without going through the cost and process of a conditional use permit. This is a lot of words, but I just wanted to show the conditional use permit criteria that are applicable to that process. So if somebody wants to build a duplex in the R2 zone right now, they would have to demonstrate conformance with these criteria that address access, parking, open space, screening, lighting, hours of operation, noise generation, adequacy of public facilities, and the physical conditions of the site. And over on the right-hand side here, I've pulled the specific development regulations from the Anacortes Municipal Code that actually get at addressing each of those particular items. So we have road standards that identify, where access points can be, when public improvements like sidewalks are required to be installed. We have parking requirements, open space standards, lighting standards, noise, concurrency. For every project, the department reviews the adequacy of the public facilities for so water, sewer, stormwater, and transportation to ensure that the development won't cause the level of service to decline below the adopted level of service in the comprehensive plan. And then finally, physical conditions of the site. The development regulations include the form and intensity standards, so the minimum setbacks, minimum lot size, maximum height, maximum building coverage. There are also, these projects would still be subject to the critical areas regulations and also stormwater regulations. So pretty much every, all these aspects that are CUP criteria are addressed in the development standards in the municipal code. So just a quick summary of some of the public comments that we received. We published notice of this proposal, and there was a 14-day public comment period. The SEPA process, this proposal was reviewed through the SEPA environmental review process. And there was also a public hearing before Planning Commission, so there was some public feedback, and some of those comments were suggesting postponement of the proposed amendment to consider that during the 2025 periodic update to allow more time for analysis of impacts and community dialogue. And then also concerns about eliminating the process for getting input from neighbors on these projects. And there's a suggestion for maybe streamlining the permit process by changing it to administrative level review versus the type 4 permit that it is right now for conditional use. The Planning Commission, after a public hearing, made a recommendation to postpone consideration of this proposed amendment to the 2025 comp plan periodic update process. And that's all I have on this one.
Okay, so we probably, I think, want to take these individually to let the members of the public address the council on this. And I just want to make sure council has, it looks like all the public comments been captured in the packet from the Planning Commission hearings, and then the city received public comment, I think Thursday, additional public comment that we added to the packet as well. So just want to make sure council has all those. And then I'll open it up for members of the public to comment on this one. So I think this is the one you wanted to comment on where I cut you off earlier. But I'll let we got 3 of these land use decisions that, and there's an opportunity again. I mean I might be wrong, but I think council's going to want to hear from members of the public before they take action on this one. So.
Well, I would just concur with what is written up there about suggesting postponement of a decision on the zoning changes. And I think, while I recognize that outright permitting shortens the process and the expense, I think that there are also some things that are bypassed, in particular the neighborhood input about what is being proposed. So, okay, and so is it here that I talk about the SEPA process?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I think that it overrides all 3 of these.
Okay.
I'm just curious because it says this is a non-project proposal. Those 4 or 5 words are quoted throughout the SEPA process. And I don't quite understand why a SEPA was even done then. If I'll just give you an example. What kind of amount of, so here's a question that's on the SEPA checklist. What kind and amount of vegetation will be removed or altered? And the answer is, this non-project proposal will not result in vegetation removal or alteration. So I'm like, what is the point of filling out the SEPA? I'm pretty sure that there are going to be some trees that come down when things are built out. I'm pretty sure that there'll be more stormwater. So I don't quite understand what the SEPA is even pertaining to. And those are my comments.
Thank you. All right, anybody else want to comment on the C's to P's? Okay, come on up. And I'm guessing you know the drill, but name and city, please.
Good evening, Council. Hi, my name is Tom Glade. I'm representing Evergreen Islands this evening, and a year or so ago, we proposed a comprehensive plan amendment that would limit the number of vacation rentals by owner. And we submitted along that was an article about what happened to Sedona after what they let vacation rentals go wild in there. And so it resulted in loss of all affordable housing there in Sedona. So I think Anacortes should be really careful about it. I think that Anacortes has taken, has required that vacation rentals be located in commercial zones, which is appropriate because they are commercial businesses. So, and then I just read the state's latest things about ADUs and some of the requirements that, all lots have the capability to have ADUs and multiple ADUs even. And then another thing is that you can't require on-site parking. So when I was living in Long Beach, California, they adopted ADUs, and they didn't require on-site parking. And so the streets became the parking lots. And so basically what happened, the streets became one-way streets because there's not enough room to get by that way. And so I think you should take great care, because Anacortes is a very small, special place, and a little harm can do a lot of damage. So thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Okay, thank you. And I'll try to help the discussion along, so that right now we're going to try to talk about this C to P's. And the way it helps me is, I've got the chart with the proposed changes, and it changes C's to P's in the R2, R3, and R3 for duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, and multifamily 4 units. So if we could try to get that, yep, come on up. And because again, we'll get B and C is next, and we'll talk about accessory dwelling units, and then some non-conforming uses. But I understand this one's the interesting topic, so yep, go for it.
Good evening. My name's Marlene Finley, and I live in Anacortes. And I would like to just share some thoughts about C to Ps. So a conditional use permit allows notification of the neighbors, as I understand it. And I think that's a good thing when you're looking at really changing the small town character. I also think that not everybody was following recent planning commission meetings in December, and we need to take a little more time so people can understand what's being proposed, because there might be some mitigation that's already in the code, as Libby said, but we need more time to look that over and understand. I know we have great housing needs, and I appreciate the work of the Anacortes Housing Action Plan, all the work that went into that. I am concerned about the loss of trees with the higher density and the loss of vegetation, and that we're seeing that's increasingly important to have this greenscaping as our climate is changing. And we have these wildly fluctuating climate or really weather events that are happening, whether it's the big downpours of rain and the snow melt and the toxins that flow in right into the bay, or heat dome impacts in the summer from higher levels of development. And I've seen this happen. I've lived in high-density urban neighborhoods. As more high densities allowed, more impact, and there's a loss of the greenscape with the more hardened development. So with that, I think I urge you to allow more time, maybe have some public work sessions, and so the public's aware of what's being proposed and the changes that could happen in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, I got a couple more. Come on up.
Andrea Dell, Anacortes. Sometimes my knees don't, are not very cooperative, so I have to get up here. Yes, I wanted to comment on this, and you know, I suppose I'm a little emotional about it instead of being very scientific, but I have lived with, since I married my husband, 14 different places. And I know how important it is to give a great deal of thought to where you live. And we have a very unique town here that can be easily changed. I question priorities. Yes, we need housing, but how fast? What are we doing to achieve that? What are we giving up to achieve that? And I was on the Planning Commission for a number of years, and more I saw that the Planning Commission, with their oversight and looking carefully at different things, were being bypassed by taking away conditional uses and having it automatically become something else, just like it says here, to go into something. So I guess I'm just saying I would I support the Planning Commission's recommendations. I urge caution. I remember Ballard when we first moved there 30 years ago, and it's unrecognizable. So I want to protect what we love, and we love Anacortes. So I just urge you to take the time, whatever it takes, take that time to do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Yep. Come on up.
Brian Wetcher, Anacortes. I would be one of those people that would ask you to roll this into the comp plan update in 2025. I understand that changing and eliminating the conditional use permit in these particular instances would make permitting much more efficient. I don't think that necessarily equates into more affordable housing, particularly in Anacortes where square footage is at a premium. Perhaps it may, in the future, if done properly, allow people to add ADUs properly within the city. We do have some areas that we can develop into multiple unit dwellings where it would be permitted at this time that are not built out. I already see contradictions in the proposed legislation that's being brought forward about the consideration of ADUs, et cetera, within the restrictions that you're putting forward here. For instance, parking requirements. They have certainly eliminated some of the parking requirements that you already have placed as a non-changed item. For instance, for triplexes and duplexes, you've kept the square footage of parking and parking spaces and the overall square footage on the lot development. I already see that the contradictions being proposed within the legislation that's coming forward. So it would be my advice that changing these will not necessarily add to affordable housing, although it will make permitting more efficient and easier and less expensive in certain circumstances, what you already have as standards may be contradicting for legislation that's coming forward on these kinds of developments. So I'd certainly urge you to have more time in studying this, and in the meantime, to not eliminate the CUPs. Keep the status quo and roll this into the 2025 process, so you know what's coming down the pike before you make these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in council chambers that want to address this issue before I turn it over for council discussion? Check online. All right, council, you ready to discuss or ask more questions of planning staff?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Question for Ms. Grage. In the R2 zone, are duplexes allowed today prior to adoption of this proposal?
Yes.
And would they be allowed after adoption of this proposal?
Yes.
And in the R3 zone, would triplexes, townhouses, and multifamily, are those allowed today?
Correct.
And would they be allowed after
Yes.
adoption of this proposal? Are there any uses that are not allowed today that would be allowed after this proposal in any zone?
No.
No, okay. No further questions.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Thank you. So I watched the Planning Commission meeting, and I also read the comments from the Planning Commission, and then also additional ones we received since it's come to council. And there's one table, 19.42.020, that I felt like was left out of the discussion, and that is the requirements for the lot size when you move from a single family to a duplex, triplex, fourplex. And it is written that if you want to do, in an R2, if you have 7,500 square feet for a single family, if you want to do a duplex, it's 9,000. And I think that there was a lot of work done when we developed the development regulations this last time around in 2019, 2020, to accommodate, to make sure that the scale in the neighborhoods kind of, as the lot got larger, the size of projects could continue. Now, you can do a 5,000 square foot house in a 7,500 square foot lot in R2, or you can do a 5,000 square foot duplex, but that requires 9,000 square feet. So there was a lot of that kind of discussion. So I just want to make that point, that there's a table, and that would have to be followed regardless of whether or not it was conditional or permitted. The other point that I heard repeated was this idea that the appeal of having conditional use is the fact that the neighbors are notified, there's a community meeting, and input is taken. So I guess my question is this, because I feel like there's kind of this gray area that I worry that expectations are unrealistic for neighbors. My question is, when those comments are collected from the neighborhood meetings, what types of comments affect that final project, and which comments are great to hear but don't actually have any impact on that final project? Because I think that we're getting tied up with this conditional to permitted, and I'm not sure if we're setting expectations for the public of when it is conditional, what types of impacts the actual neighbors can have on the final project. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So when a development permit requires a conditional use permit, the proposal has to, as you mentioned, meet the specific criteria for review and approval of a conditional use permit. So the comments that we receive from the public that the decision maker reviews should be generally aimed towards how the proposal complies or does not comply with the criteria in the in 1936. So those are review criteria. It's comments that say, we don't want this in our neighborhood. The decision maker can't take those into account. The decision maker is looking at compliance with the conditional use permit criteria. If they find that the proposal complies, then they must issue the conditional use permit. Did that answer your question?
That does. I feel like that's kind of that missing component when we discuss kind of pushing it down for another couple years or not. And so I think that's something that I would like to hear the rest of council discuss. I don't know if the public has a comment on that too, because to me that's kind of the real crux of the discussion from my perspective.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton and then Mr. Walters.
I really appreciate the point that Ms. Cleland McGrath brought up about things like the lot size. What is permitted for a single family home, you can build a 5,000 square foot one on whatever size lot versus what you can do with the size of a duplex that you need a much larger lot. And I think that context has been missing from the conversation, as well as all the work that was done by the Planning Commission, City Council, with public input, staff work to get these development regulations as they are now to a point where they are clear and someone can look at them and see what they need to do and move council, as Mr. Walters has said, move us away from quasi-judicial decisions and have our code help take care of that for us. And I think we've done some really good work on that. And again, to the thoughts, and I do feel that maybe there is a perception that if people don't like something, they can vote it down. Of course, people can raise their voices, but that's not what decides. That's not the condition that leads to the permit. Yes, you have to take the comments, but that's not what decides whether it's built or not. So I support the changing in this instance of the C's to P's, because this is the direction that we are trying to move as a city, to have this clarity and get housing built. And no one's calling it affordable. No one's saying it's going to be, but we have a 0% vacancy rate and we need homes. And hopefully there will be a duplex will be less expensive to rent, or a triplex than the 5,000 square foot homes that we have right now, and give people options who want to move out of their 5,000 square foot homes into something that's more manageable.
Mr. Walters.
As I'd mentioned before, this has been basically a decade-long or longer process of moving toward more certainty in the land use code, and some of that is a reaction to what the community said that we wanted, that we needed, way back in 2011, 2012, 2013. If we are to change to a hearing examiner system, because that was the proposal way back then, elimination of the Planning Commission for all intents and purposes for permit processes, then we don't feel comfortable doing that unless we have more standards. That's what the community said. The community was completely right, because the code back then had no standards. The code today, after the 2016 comp plan update and then the 2019 development code adoption, does have standards, and that's what you see here. I'm here to tell you that the individual review of permits in a conditional use permit process does not result in the outcomes that we all want. What results in those outcomes is having standards. Give you an example. We all want to have more natural processes to address stormwater, rain gardens, bioswales, those kinds of things. Ensure clean water and ensure management of the quantity of water. we in Western Washington are doing a much better job of that than we have ever before. And it's not because we have a year-long public process associated with a permit. It's because we have hundreds of pages of engineering manuals that prescribe natural processes to use to manage stormwater. It's through standards, writing standards, which we did and resulted in our 2019 update to the development code, that we are actually affecting change. Individual review of permits is too much work. It wears down the community. It creates conflict between neighbors that is really undesirable from my view, and that's why we've been trying to move away from that. Now, there's this alternative suggestion that we wait for the 2025 comp plan update. This isn't a comp plan amendment. This wouldn't get addressed in the comp plan update. I mean, maybe you could shoehorn it in, but it's a development code amendment. And so what we ought to do is make this change now to tee us up for the comp plan update. In the 2025 comp plan update, we are going to have to plan to accommodate thousands of new houses in Anacortes, which should make us a little nervous. But it is also a state requirement that we do that. And the reason it is because we have a housing crisis. And in a situation where we have a 0% vacancy rate and not enough houses to go around, the only two levers that we can push on or pull on are supply and demand. Regulating short-term rentals are one way that we can affect both of those. But to improve supply, we need more housing, not just in Anacortes, but in Western Washington and on the West Coast and in the United States. This is not reasonably in dispute. And when I talk to other jurisdictions, including ones nearby like Mount Vernon, I say, Anacortes is working on these issues. We're not perfect. We're not generating as much housing as we are already required to under the last round of comp plan revisions. But we're doing better than we were before, and we're providing more options for people in different housing sizes and types and styles. Our existing housing market is very homogeneous, which doesn't work when you have a lot of diversity in your population. But we need everybody to do their part, and Anacortes is one of those entities that needs to do their part. Now, this isn't creating any 5-story buildings near you. It's not adding uses that aren't currently allowed. It's not even increasing the density because we do have those limits or minimums on lot sizes associated with the uses. This is a very simple change. You saw it there basically on one slide, changing Cs to Ps, and the effect on the ground will hopefully be a few more of those developments, but a few more, if it were a 500% increase, it'd be 5. Since we've had 1 in the R3 zone, I think you said it was, since 2011. We need more flexibility this way. This provides that flexibility without having to go to the question of, are we doing 5-story buildings in the R4 zone, those kinds of things that people really get worked up about and are a substantial change to their neighborhoods. In my house, 100-year-old house, if I had had a slightly different layout, I could have remodeled my basement into another dwelling unit. And then we could have had 2 families living in 6,000 square feet instead of just 1. And you wouldn't see a different house from the outside. And that, I think, is an important thing. This could generate some gentle increases in density while keeping things at neighborhood scale. And that is, I think, one of the best approaches that we have come up with to solving some of the housing crisis and addressing our real affordability problem here in Anacortes.
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Mayor Miller. What I hear is, one, we have a wonderful community and we want to keep it. And the fight is to not become what we've seen happen in other cities that were similar at one point. And I think Mr. Welcher or someone mentioned, Ms. Dahl mentioned Ballard, mentioned these other places. That's the pushback. I get that. On the other hand, we have a need for housing here in Anacortes, but we're no different than the world over. I think if we turn on the television, we'll hear on World News Tonight, any city in the country trying to figure out how do we have housing, spur housing, and then how in the world do we keep it or make it affordable? That's really a subjective thing. And it's really difficult because unless you regulate some way to carry that forward such that the next person that purchases this house, that purchased it from someone that was buying it as an affordable housing, how do you carry that forward? And those are things that I think that we're still wrestling with as a country. I just don't believe that we have the solution. But I do think, though, that as under cross-examination of Libby by Mr. Walters, politely said, of course, that in the R3 zone, there's really not any changes because these are already permitted uses. In the R2 zone, there's not really any changes because these are permitted uses. And the thing that I think is so important, particularly now in this change, is that the community wants to have input. It don't want to have something sort of shoved down their throat and says, this is what you've got, like it or not, and it's a terrible addition to the neighborhood. But I think to Ms. Cleland McGrath's point, there are standards that are already in place. I really do believe that. And so I continue to struggle with how do we make housing affordable. There are strategies to mitigate that, but I'm not clear on how we can sustain that beyond the initial purchase. And I think one of the closest things that I saw to a great plan, in my opinion, was Habitat for Humanity's plan, meaning the longer you stay, the more equity you have. If you don't stay, then you don't sort of gain that equity. But I'm cautious too, and I don't want our town to change much, because I love it the way that it is. But the reality is change happens and is happening right now. It's quite fluid. So what do we do? I'm not sure if we postpone this, what do we gain? I don't know. And if someone's got an answer to that, let me know. But from what I heard here tonight, most of the permitted uses that we're talking about right now, particularly in those zones, are already pretty much there. And then the only thing we're really discussing is the conditional use permit. And if I understood that correctly, it's more about the community having input and having that input weighed. So I'm still not sure, but that's how I understand what's taking place, and I recognize the concern. I really do. Thank you.
So the staff, of course, in the packet did put some alternatives action to help move this along, if that's council's desire. So,
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
So I very recently walked a lot of the streets in the R2 residential zone, as that is where I live, and a lot of Ward 3. And so I recently engaged with a lot of the constituents and asked them, what they're looking to get from council and what they're looking to get from what we do up here. And one of the things that I was struck by with how many people still want to have a voice. And what I would say about that is we say input, but I would go farther than that and say it's not just about input, it's about educating the public. It doesn't mean that what we're doing is necessarily the wrong decision, but we do live in a very small, tight community where if we don't take the proper time to educate our community, then there are lots of other narratives that slip into play and will hinder us from streamlining these processes in the future. I think this is a perfect example. You know, I mean, I've only been here for a month on council, but I received more calls and more people stopping by my house about this particular ordinance or change than I have in the other 4 meetings, you know, so far, understandably so. But I do feel like anytime we are looking to remove the opportunity for public comment, especially when it's been something that has existed for so long, I do understand the point that, you know, just because we are allowed to public comment doesn't mean the comments that we're going to make are going to stop a project, and we don't want to create false expectations that will happen. I totally get that. But my question would be, any of the times that we've gone through this conditional use process before, have there ever been time, and this is something I'd have to look into, I don't know, have there ever been times when public comment has changed one of the dynamics of the project or changed any part of it before? Or has that just never happened and is why we're eliminating public comment? Do you happen to, I mean, that's a big ask, I know, because that's a lot.
Well, I think for conditional use permits for other types of uses that are more, you know, unusual and infrequent than a duplex or a triplex, which are kind of, we sort of know what the impact, what to expect with the impacts there. I mentioned that we haven't processed a conditional use permit for a duplex.
Right.
Or a triplex in those zones in at least 12 years. So I don't know that I can answer your question because I don't have that experience.
And then I also kind of wonder, you know, again, just keeping the public engaged, I think, is very important. And just because we are going to allow for more units to be built doesn't mean we're going to be allowing for more affordable units to be built, because we're not setting any kind of limits around what these units could potentially cost or rent for. Is that?
That's correct.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the last thing, and this is maybe just, you know, a new question from the new guy, but when you have HOA rules that do kind of say that you can't do certain types of these things, and this will probably be more for the ones later, but does our ordinance, or does our zoning change supersede the HOA rules?
No.
It doesn't. So the HOAs are still allowed to have.
Correct.
That, so Skyline can still have their rules around what
Yes.
they want housing to be, and
That's correct. Yeah, the private conditions and covenants would take precedent over the whatever the city's requirements are, but the city does not get involved in that. The city
Sure.
does not enforce those covenants.
sure. And then my last thing, I know Councilman Young had said, you know, what do we have to, was it lose from doing this? But I would also say, like, what is the need to do this right now? Is it just to encourage more, because the Planning Commission, you know, unanimously recommended postponing this to give the public, it seemed like when I watched a little bit, to give the public more time to be educated on what it is that we're changing, because once we make the change, we make the change. So what, are we expecting there to be a huge influx of new permits that come in? Should we make this change today versus, you know, months down the road?
No, not necessarily, but I think it, you know, provides the opportunity that's not there, or that is there, but it's a difficult road.
It's a difficult, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So between now and whenever the comprehensive plan and development regulation update is completed, which won't be for another year and a half, you know, there's all that time that goes by where you may not be getting those duplexes and triplexes, housing units built.
Sure. And just one more question on this, and again, I apologize. I have a lot of questions because I'm
It's
very
okay.
new. So, in regards to kind of the environmental impact of this, like for instance, there is a lot a couple down from me where Skagit Habitat for Humanity is proposing a great project for these 5 cottages. That lot is also full of trees and, you know, and everything. So to this SEPA process, there wouldn't have to be any kind of like study done once we make the change for any kind of on a per project basis, like that would have an environmental impact, or does that make sense? Am I asking that? I might not be asking that well.
So the SEPA process for a project is triggered, there's a couple of different triggers. So it could be the number of units, grading quantities, things like that.
So would that still happen?
Yes, this would.
Even if we change from a C to a P?
Yes, that is a separate law body of regulations and would still, any project would be subject to SEPA if it exceeded the exemption thresholds.
Thank you.
All really good questions.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. McDougall, thank you. I was going to call on you.
Yeah. A couple more quick questions. So in the 2019-2020 regulation update, we basically made a larger portion of town, made it basically permitted to do like duplexes, triplexes, and the like. Either shifted from either not permitted or conditional to permitted. Do you recall, do you have a sense for like, did we basically shift about a third of town to be able to build duplexes or triplexes in that regulation update?
I don't know if I have a
It's
good
hard to
answer
say,
for
yeah.
that.
Did we have we had like a big jump though I know we had a jump in kind of like non-single family home in 2021, 22.
We've seen quite a few townhouse development
townhouses.
projects when the regulations were loosened up in the mixed use areas. We saw a lot of townhouse, but I don't know that there's necessarily been a big jump in duplex development.
That was my sense as well, is that some, but not a big jump. And given the geography we're dealing with here, where it's probably, I don't know, it's probably 80% covered by CCNRs that are going to prevent it anyway. It's not going to be a huge number if we were to go forward with this change.
I think in the R2 zone, that's probably correct.
Okay.
In the R3 zone, you need a larger lot to do a duplexes are permitted outright on whatever the minimum lot size is, but for a triplex, I think you would need 10,000 square feet, and up to 4 units would be 12,500 square feet, and there just aren't that many lots in the R3 zone that meet that size.
Okay, cool. And then finally, really quickly, in both R2 and R3, what's the maximum permitted like square footage for a single family home? And it's going to depend on lot size probably, but there's probably places where we can go up to 6,000 square feet, right?
There's no maximum size per se for a single family home.
Okay,
It's
just like height and...
yeah, it's based on what the building envelope is, so the setbacks and maximum height. And
so with the average household size in Anacortes of about 2.2, so the carbon footprint of a 6,000 square foot home with 2.2 people in it versus the carbon footprint of the same 6,000, which is still pretty big for a duplex or even a triplex. Now you're talking 7 people in that space. So the carbon footprint is going to be roughly the same for those 2 buildings, but the average carbon footprint of the individuals is going to be much smaller. Thank you.
All right, so we've heard from every member of council on this subject, and there are a number of actions that council could take moving forward.
Mayor Miller?
Mrs. Cleveland McGrath.
I just want to answer a couple more, or make a couple comments from my previous question. I think Mr. McDougall makes a good point. If you go back to that table for form and intensity standards for residential zones, regardless of whether it's a single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, whatnot, They have identical setbacks. They have identical, lot coverage maximums. They have landscaped areas are the same percentages. So when we're talking about trying to fit in higher density versus single family, I mean, yeah, you make a good point when regarding the environmental impacts, right? I want to go and talk about a couple other things. There was mention of the or about affordability and all of those things. I think that's a hard thing to talk about. Not hard. It gets frustrating to talk about. We should only, when we talk about doing higher density and somehow tying it to affordability. In reality, we're at a 0% vacancy rate. So everything is continuing to go up in cost and housing prices because there's such a demand. So even if at the bare minimum, just building market rate housing continues to take a little bit of pressure off what we're currently experiencing, and we continue to experience. So I think that higher density does not necessarily, you're right, equal or somehow address the affordability issue, but at least it hopefully keeps folks who are already here able to stay here and their next generation. Talking about the additional costs versus doing conditional use permits versus permitted for C's to P's here. You've got a great table here that shows if it's conditional, it's taken 6 months. It means a lot of neighborhood meetings. It means the fact that if you are looking to buy a parcel and you want to do a feasibility period and have it under contract, that's typically, for a lot 60 to 90 days. If there's a house on it that you're working on, to request more than 30 days is probably not realistic. So when we aren't seeing the applications come forward to do a conditional use permit with duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, such as what we're addressing today, it's because folks can't make the numbers work. They either would have to buy the property outright and have a backup plan of doing some smaller, lower density, high cost single family, whereas most folks who are trying to do some kind of multifamily can't turn around and do some high-end house, right? So the fact that we haven't seen any is likely due to the conditional use. There's also kind of the other kind of emotional components, which has been addressed about kind of creating conflict in the neighborhood. But I think there's actual hard costs to having that longer period. I also just want to talk about one other thing that I think came up for me thinking about 5, 10, 20 years from now. The appeal the thing that appeals to me when it comes to these duplexes, triplexes changing from conditional to permitted for these is the fact that there are really clear defined design requirements, development requirements. It requires off-street parking. It requires the percentages. What kind of scares me a bit is the alternative is someone buys a lot, they build a 5,000 square foot house on it, and then in 2 years they build 2 ADUs that don't require hookup fees, that don't require off-street parking. And is that what we want, and doesn't require a number of the other additional things that are expected when you do a duplex or triplex? So when we talk about, well, maybe we're going backwards or there's a conflict in some of our rules, I agree. I think it's really confusing that, the state also says that we can't do a 900 minimum. We have to bump up an ADU to 1,000. So now we're saying that we could take a 7,500 square foot lot, I think in R2, and we don't want to put a duplex on it, but in 2 years, we're gonna be able to put a 5,000 square foot house and then another 1,000 plus another 1,000 ADU on it, but those 2 ADUs don't have off-street parking. Like, that's concerning to me. And I think that there's gonna be a lot of discussion about that, and some of that is our hands are tied because the state has mandated what cities can restrict or allow. So I appreciate the work that Planning Commission did. I appreciate the comments, but I continue to feel that it's important for us to take these steps now and not wait 2, 3, 4 years, because these are folks, if we can get, I don't know, 2 or 3 of these built with 2 or 3 units, that's 9 households that would otherwise not be here. And I think that's really important. We have limited land, and we can't waste any more time not utilizing that land as effectively as possible. We want to protect the forest lands. I agree that we need to continue to address trees and having protection, coverage when it comes to development, and coverage when it comes to our sidewalks and having, all of that. But to me, this is a pretty easy fix that I don't see in reality the conditional use giving the neighbors what I think they assume they're going to get by having that conditional use component. So, I'm support moving this forward. Not the Planning Commission version, but the proposed ordinance.
Yeah, the way the packet has the proposed ordinance is the ordinance to change C to Ps in the packet, and the Planning Commission's recommendation is just to delay it to the comprehensive plan process. And then some other alternative actions that are in the packet. If you'd be happy to read them, but I think you all can probably read those.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
To step back a bit here for a moment, thank you for leaving this slide up. If you look at, say, Ward 3, R2 is implicated by this ordinance, meaning that R2, the yellow there, would have that underlining zoning change. But I challenge you to find any more than a couple of lots in that yellow area that aren't otherwise encumbered by HOA constraints, CCRs, that wouldn't allow the zoning changes to have any effect. R2A, the orange area, is not affected by this ordinance at all. It's R3, teal, that is the only other area that is affected by this ordinance where this would have any effect. So that, I think, in a nutshell, encapsulates the scope, the real scope of what these changes would do. Doesn't introduce any uses that aren't already allowed, and I swear to God, there are much harder questions coming than this. We are in a housing crisis. By any measure, we do not have enough housing. Not just Anacortes, locally, regionally, nationally. It is a really bad situation. For people that own their own home, like me, like you, it's a slow-moving crisis. You don't notice it. For people that rent, they are noticing it. And for people that work here who can't afford to live here, they notice. There is a related crisis, and that's the homelessness crisis. It is not reasonably in dispute. That crisis is made worse by fentanyl, by mental illness, by cities that have not handled homelessness well, but it is not caused by any of those things. It's caused by a shortage of housing. There simply aren't enough chairs to go around when the music stops. We have had a 0% vacancy rate here in Skagit County for a long time. We've had quite a bit of discussion about that here because we all have to do our part to get more housing introduced. These houses that we are talking about are not gigantic conditional use permits. They might look exactly like the house next door that required no public process. But the craziest thing is that our code today would allow you to build a single-family residence of 3,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet with no public process. Only one family would get to live in that house. In my neighborhood, there's one at the end of the street. Is it a house or is it a compound? But entirely permitted with no public process. That is the opposite of where we need to be going. We need to make more smaller, more flexible arrangements so that people can move from their bigger houses when they downsize into smaller houses or condos, so that families can move into those larger houses that have more bedrooms, and so that people who work here can afford to live here. I want Ghirardelli to be open on Mondays, but they can't find enough people to work. These are consequences of our housing environment and the ecosystem that we've built here. We've got to do something different. And this is so minor, especially compared to what we are going to be doing in 2025 when we try to figure out how to put several thousand more houses here in the next 20 years. Not because we asked for it, but because we are required to.
Okay, so I know everybody on council has weighed in on this, and I feel like there's some, certainly a majority opinion if you want to take this up now.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
I just want to add one comment. I live in the R3 zone, and I just looked up my lot size is 6,100 feet, and my house is 1,300 square feet. I could not tear down my house and build a duplex in my R3 lot because I'm required to have a 7,500 square foot lot. So just to put that in a little bit of context, my neighbor, his lot is a corner lot and it's quite a bit larger. And just even thinking about it, a duplex would be totally fine there based on my opinion as a neighbor, but also based on our code. And if it was going to be a triplex, it would need to be 10,000 square feet, which is 2/3 larger than the lot size I have. So I think that the scale that we're talking about here is also very reasonable. And so I'm looking back to my packet. If there are no more, thank you. If there are no more comments, I move to adopt ordinance 4070 as presented, changing the C's to the P's.
Okay, I got a motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. Walters to adopt ordinance 4070 as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion. I hope public found that informative. We are on to item 6B, which is ordinance 4071, consideration of Planning Commission's recommendation to amend AMC 1947-030, accessory dwelling units to remove owner occupancy requirements. So discussion item and possible action, and of course, comments are encouraged from the public. Ms. Grange.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So this particular amendment, as you just mentioned, would eliminate the requirement that an owner occupy either the primary or accessory dwelling unit on a lot that has an ADU. So the only changes you see is just striking out this entire section of the municipal code in 1947-030C, which is where the accessory dwelling unit provisions live. And it was mentioned before a little bit, but some of the background on this particular proposal is that the new the state legislature passed HB 1337, which made changes to RCW 3670A, and it changes the local government's role in regulating accessory dwelling units. There is a list of items that the city of Anacortes will need to implement in order to be in compliance with this new state law. One of those items being that we will no longer be able to will no longer be able to require owner occupancy of one of the units on a lot with an ADU. Those changes required by HB 1337 need to be adopted within 6 months of the due date of the next periodic update, which is December 2025 would be that deadline. And staff is planning to bring forward the additional proposed amendments for the public conversation about what changes need to be made in order for our city to be in compliance with these new state rules. For now, the reason that staff is bringing forward this one change is because we know that the state, we're eventually going to have to remove this requirement because of the state law. If this provision remains in the code between now and when we change it in a year and a half, it means that for every accessory dwelling unit that somebody wants to build, they'll still have to record this covenant that, they have to complete this covenant, record it at the auditor's office to the title of the property. And it costs money and time to do that. And it seems like if, it would be more, it would reduce the amount of work for both an owner that wants to build an ADU and staff to eliminate that requirement at this point. So the Housing Action Plan also recommended removing this requirement, and I think that might have been before the 1337 bill, but the rationale given by the Housing Action Plan is that the owner occupancy requirement is discriminatory against renters and perpetuates economic exclusion. It raises financial risk for owners by constraining choice of where to live in the future, and it reduces the chances of receiving bank financing. In addition, the requirement is difficult to enforce, and then there's some, it's considered best practice to not have this requirement by AARP and the Washington chapter of the American Planning Association. This is just a screenshot of, in the Housing Action Plan, there was, extensive community feedback. There was a community survey, and so this is just, there was a question about making it easier to build ADUs, relaxing restrictions on ADUs, and you can see what people thought about that idea. So for public comment summary, we did receive a couple of comments supporting the change. Again, there were some suggestions that this change also be deferred to the 2025 comp plan update to allow for more analysis and time for the public to review the potential impacts. There, in the comments, was a perception that potentially renters have different property maintenance standards and behavior than owners. And there was concern about potential resulting negative impacts to surrounding neighborhoods based on that. And then finally, some folks were concerned about the relationship to private covenants governing ADUs. So if they live in a neighborhood that has private covenants that say that the owner has to live in one of the units, would this requirement supersede their covenants? And the answer is no. And then finally, the Planning Commission recommended, after the public hearing, to adopt these proposed amendments as presented. Thank you.
Okay, possibly less controversial since the state is going to mandate this pretty soon, but I will open it up for members of the public that wish to address the council on ordinance 4071. And looking online. Okay, yep, come on up.
Brian Wetcher, Anacortes. A number of years ago, Evergreen Islands brought forward some resolutions and comp plan changes to help regulate short-term rentals and vacation rentals. And at that time, during that research, found out that a number of communities similar to ours, semi-resort communities that also have goods and services locally, were losing housing by short-term rentals. A perfect example of a community that had to react to that is Leavenworth. Leavenworth was at less than 60% local occupancy, and they made some very stringent requirements in the last few years about owner occupancy. Also, there has been some regulatory process in Port Townsend about that, particularly in certain zones, because they were worried that certain areas of their community was simply going to be a short-term rental vacation area. Another good example of this is South Camino Island. There's an entire community there that has 10% local occupancy that's on the Eastern Lagoon, and they're all mega houses. You know, they're talking about 5,000 square foot. These are 10,000 square foot houses, and they're all short-term rentals. The problem here, I'm sure, is that the legislature is going to require us to do this. The counterpoint is that we need to develop a rigorous standard by which we regulate the amount of non-residency that is also being converted into short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are not going to do anything for housing in Anacortes. So I would ask that the council, once again, when they adopt this, look at those kinds of regulations and find a way of regulating this efficiently. I know if you go out there online right now and look for a vacation rental in Anacortes, you can find half a dozen online that violate the existing rules that you have, including people that are renting boats within the harbor on Airbnb. So just a cautionary note. We could be receiving the same kind of short-term occupancy, particularly during the summertime, that will leave us with a lot of empty housing during the wintertime, and it's not going to do anything except eat up our real estate space. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else want to comment on the accessory dwelling unit removing the short-term occupancy, the owner occupancy requirement? That's not a short-term occupancy requirement, sorry. Owner occupancy requirement.
Good evening, Tom Glade again for Evergreen Islands. The thing about, the owner is not required to be on the thing is amazing to me. If the people in Seattle say this is a great investment opportunity in Anacortes, they're really hireable, these little places down here. We can buy a lot and have like 4 units there, and so we have all the owners would be absentee owners, and I could see that in the future, where a lot of people say, the majority of the people here saying, we're making a lot of money on these ADUs because it's such a desirable place to live. So I think it needs some real deep thought about that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Okay, come on up.
Kathleen Lawrence Flanagan, Anacortes. One question I have is, I don't understand how owner occupancy discriminates against renters. I don't get that. And then somewhere I read that ADUs can't even be used as short-term rentals in residential zones. And is that just in Anacortes, or is that across the state? And is that a moratorium, or is that a permanent,
Well,
permanent what law?
that one we can probably answer, and I can make sure I can get it right. It's prohibited in residential and moratorium in certain other areas. All right, I'm getting a shaking yes head from the smart people on the staff that I got that right. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, to expand on that, in our 2019 Development Code update, we prohibited the use of residential zone properties for short-term rental. Now that didn't affect short-term rentals that were already existing as of the time of the Development Code update, which is typical, right? You adopt new zoning code, it affects prospectively, but not retroactively. It's typical, but not necessarily required. And then more recently, we came back and imposed a moratorium on the use of residential dwellings as short-term rentals in commercial and multi-use zones. And that is the proposal for permanent adoption that will be coming forward to the Planning Commission next. Because we definitely recognize the risk, the effect that short-term rentals can have on the housing market, taking housing off the market and replacing it with simply transient lodging for tourists. Here, this particular proposal is pretty simple because it is required by the state. There are other components of their ADU bill that we will need to address going forward in the next 2 years, but this one is simply one of them. Another is that you've got to reduce your impact fee to no more than 50% of the primary dwelling when you permit an ADU. We, for quite some time, have had zero impact fee for ADUs. And the idea there is to lower the cost of development of smaller housing that will be less expensive than the 4,000 square foot houses. So this one I think is fairly straightforward, but I also recognize that there are some concerns about renters versus landowners, and setting aside for a moment whether those are valid or not, when there are disruptions in neighborhoods, we do need to deal with those. And we probably need to do a better job of code enforcement. Maybe we need more code enforcement generally. Maybe we need a better noise ordinance that can more directly address the problems rather than using this proxy of owner occupancy to try to get at those things. An owner of a house might make as much noise as a tenant in a different house. And it's the noise that is the problem that we need to go after. It's the trash in the yard or the landscaping problem, you know, the overgrown weeds or whatever those are. Those things we can address directly rather than using this proxy of owner occupancy.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. I agree with the sentiment from Mr. Welcher as well as Mr. Glade. You know, I do think that, you know, when we begin to look at this, there are questions and answers we really need to have. I still struggle a bit with not, although I recognize we're being required by the state, you know, with the RCW, I hear that. But I do think that there's a deeper level of conversation we really need to have about how do we regulate it. Are there needed regulations that can and need to come with this? I still struggle with, you know, having 2 ADUs in a yard. I know it meets certain criteria, but how do you manage that? How do you, you know, just sort of work through those pieces of it? I think it's a great idea to have ADUs. I do. But the question is, how are we regulating it? How do we know who they are? How do we know what's happening? There are pieces of this that I find missing. And I'm not sure if this, given the requirement by the state, and I think Ms. Grange might be able to answer this for me, is this part of what we have to have in place by 2025? You know, because I guess what I'm looking for is tonight the night we really need to make this decision? Because there are pieces of this that I would also like us to have answers to as well.
Yeah, tonight is not the night that the decision needs to be made. We need to implement all of the requirements of the new ADU bill by December 2025. The thought with bringing this one forward is that it could eliminate, cost and time for applicants, unnecessary cost and time, and having to record the accessory dwelling unit owner occupancy covenant when it's not going to be required in a year and a half.
I totally
sense?
understand that. I mean, because, I think it's what you're speaking to is efficiency and how to facilitate opportunity. I totally get that. The struggle I'm having with it is the unanswered part of that, I think it was said earlier, good intentions and sometimes leading to unintended consequences of it. I just think that a little bit more thought needs to be put into this, how we implement it, because obviously we have to, but how we implement it and how do we regulate that such that it works for our town. And I think that, that would be my sentiment. I think we have plenty of time. We have all 2024, 2025. I don't perceive this as kicking the can down the road. Not at all. I don't. I think that, but we need to have a deeper discussion about what does it mean, how do we begin to address the concerns of community and how we get there. And, personally, I love the idea of ADU. I really do. But I want to make sure that we have the regulations, the deeper thought into place, and that we don't have the unintended consequences of other cities that have leaked in good intending, but there were other consequences. So I just want us to have a little bit more of a conversation about this. And so, as my personal opinion, I'm leaning toward, not moving this forward and having a deeper conversation.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
So when I read this, I also like the idea of ADUs, and as I understand it, we have the moratorium on residential areas, so we're not looking at, is that right? Like, we have the moratorium on residential areas that we're hoping is going to become kind of a permanent.
So if you're referring to short-term rentals?
Yes, short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
So currently, short-term rentals are not a permitted use in residential zones, and there is a moratorium on short-term rentals of residential dwelling units in commercial and mixed-use zones.
Okay, and then I also think that because I read this 1337, all of it is a very interesting read, and I also had a lot of questions that came up. But one of the things that I did see is that it does look like we would be able to impose impact fees for ADUs that currently don't exist under the owner-occupied model. Is that correct also?
The council could impose impact fees right now if you wanted to.
But we don't currently have them.
We don't. No,
the
they are exempt from payment of impact fees.
And then one of the things that I really, even though I do still have a lot of questions about it and also would like to move this down the road and have further discussion on it, one of the things that I really like about it is with this being, we have a lot of seniors in this community that are currently, a lot of them looking to downsize, maybe move into different types of housing, maybe move into assisted living. Some of them have the needs to do that. And what I like about this is that not requiring that owner-occupied, they could possibly rent both of those properties and generate more income for themselves to be able to use for those assisted living places or whatever their needs require. Mm-hmm. So being, having a strong senior population, I really like that. I do think there's a couple other things that we need to dive a little deeper into before I'm 100% ready to move forward on it, but I like where this is headed a lot. And then we don't have to implement it You said the periodic update was December 2025. Is that when it?
The periodic update and development regulation update is due in June 2025, but
June,
the
okay.
city has until 6 months after that to
Do it.
adopt
So
these.
there is some time, theoretically speaking. There's time if we wanted it. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm generally supportive, although I think Mr. Glade makes a very good point about absentee owners and essentially real estate speculation. You know, I'm pretty sure we've got that going on today, even without an ADU on site. However, ADUs on site maybe makes that business proposition even better for that speculator. So that is absolutely a concern. Ms. Grage, do we have line of sight into what the state's regulation is going to look like, and if there might be safeguards against that sort of essentially abuse or speculation?
I don't know that there's anything specific to that in the state legislation, but the city could certainly look into doing something regarding that.
Okay.
When we come forward with the full conversation about implementing.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to, look at options or possibilities for trying to curb that kind of behavior or even prevent, because that would be important. I also wanted to make a quick point on impact fees as well. I'm a big supporter of the zero impact fees for the ADUs, and I'm hoping at some point we are prevented from having like a higher impact fee on a larger square footage single family home. Like, we basically have to charge the same impact fee for a 1,200 square foot new home as for a 5,000 square foot single family home, which really encourages the wrong behavior or the opposite behavior that we as a community, as a council are after. So I'm hoping that our legislature at some point soon gives us the ability to charge essentially a big impact fee on, say, single family homes above some square footage. I don't know what that square footage is, or maybe it's a graduated thing. But then, essentially make building a 5,000 square foot house actually really expensive from an impact fee standpoint. And then Mr. Turner made a great point about, use of fees such as that to fund affordable housing potentially. So that's where I would propose putting that kind of thing. So I'll send an email to Ms. Hubick and our folks in Olympia and see if where that's at.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
On the point raised by Mr. McDougall about impact fees, I actually think that there was some recent legislation that said not quite what you asked for, but something similar. I'll see if I can find it. We did raise that in the Association of Washington Cities Housing Work Group last year as a need for cities to have a safe harbor provision if they wanted to do precisely what you just mentioned, which is what we had talked about when we adopted our latest round of impact fees. I wanted to mention that this particular proposal is only about the owner occupancy requirement, and what's coming later is the 2 ADU requirement and those kinds of things. Those are the complicated things where we probably should have maybe some design standards around how, we have design standards now, but about how we're going to do 2 ADUs. I think the legislation requires it to either be, or allows it to be 2 detached or 2 attached, or any combination thereof. So that I think is complicated. This is not. I had a call from a constituent in another ward a couple of days ago. She has a relatively large lot and she lives in her house on it. She wants to be able to put an ADU for a person that doesn't have enough money to buy a house and property in Anacortes on her lot. And assuming that they can work all that through our design standards and everything, that'd be great. But then what happens when the primary owner dies? You have a lease, right? The ADU owner has a lease, But under our code, they would be prohibited from staying there unless someone buys the house and lives in it. What if they buy it and rent it? How does that work? And where is the fairness there? I think that this constraint that we have in our code, while well-intentioned, doesn't really get at the real problem that we're trying to solve, which is impacts on neighborhoods. We need to do better work to actually address those impacts, but we need to free people up to engage in real free market transactions to rent housing and provide it to people that need it, which is everyone.
Okay, so what's council's desire action this evening, or
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
I just wanted to add, as far as it's needing to be adopted in a year and a half, if I want to build, okay, so if I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to rent an ADU and my house and not live in either, I am artificially constrained for a year and a half from doing that because we're not ready to make a proactive move based on what we are going to have to do very soon. I feel that hamstrings people who could potentially do this and create another unit of housing in the next year and a half instead of waiting because the state is going to make us do it then. I just feel that that's not, whether we could talk about it all we want, it's not going to change that part of it. So I'm in favor of moving this forward tonight, and I move to adopt ordinance 4071, amending AMC 1947-030, accessory dwelling unit, to remove the owner occupancy requirement as presented.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Ms. Cleland McGrath to adopt ordinance 4071, amending AMC to remove the owner occupancy requirement as presented. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Cleland McGrath and then Mr. Young.
I appreciate all of the discussion that's already happened, but I just wanted to put one little bit out there for the public for folks who are interested. In the packet today, there is a guidance for ADUs in Washington State from the Department of Commerce. And to me, that was the first time I had seen that pamphlet. And I have to say that there's a lot of work that we need to do before we have to implement the 2 ADU requirement. So take a look at that. I think there's a lot of concern. We've done what we can when it comes to short-term rentals, but we need some really creative ways of making sure that we continue to keep our neighborhoods familiar and in the same vein. And that's me still saying that we should do permitted and not all conditional, but that was quite eye-opening. So please take a look at that because we're going to need your help.
Mr. Young.
I love the idea of moving forward, and I love the drive of my fellow council woman, Ms. Moulton, to make this issue not wait, because it is important. However, I still say that there are questions we really need to have answered. I'm a supporter, but I just think that in just moving this forward right now, I think that we've lacked doing the due diligence, if only postponing for a bit of time to consider all the other options and how we can regulate it. So I would move that we postpone this discussion for a later date. Thank you, Mr. Walters. It's sort of my other brain on the other side giving me the legalities of it. I move we postpone this discussion until a couple of weeks, which would give us a chance to have a deeper discussion and also be able to submit to the staff and the team questions about, to review what other cities have done or have not done, and also comments from the public about what we've seen in other areas and what may be suitable regulation. So I propose that we push this off for about 3 weeks to a month.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Fantini.
was there already a motion on the table?
Yeah, but of course, I have to dust off my Roberts Rules brain here. So there's a new motion by Mr. Young, which I think technically is to table this discussion. I think you said a couple months or so, but the next council meeting would be 5 February, if that's...
I don't know if that's the
No.
right procedure, because we have a motion on the table already, unless in a
Yeah,
second. So
unless he has a second.
Second.
That's the...
so that I'm going to defer to our clerk over there.
yeah.
So you can, that's proper procedure. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, let's do that. All
Yeah,
right, good
so
to know.
I did dust off my Roberts Rules, so
All
yeah,
right.
you can, and please don't do any more motions, because then I'll have to start writing them down. But yeah, so there's kind of a motion. So there's a motion by Mr. Young to table the discussion, and I put a date on that for you, because I don't table it for a month, or was I think what you said,
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Technically, it's postponed consideration, not
Okay.
table, but yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I don't support that.
Yeah, I postponed, but I don't know if I need to give you a time frame to do that. But I do have a second by Mr. Fantini, and we'll work out the details of my Roberts Rules here on that.
Mayor Miller.
There we go, Ms. Swetnam, thank you.
Thanks. So if it is a motion to postpone to a certain time, that does require a certain time to be noted, unless council moves to table the motion.
Okay, great, thank you, that helps me out. So are you, do you want to give a date, a certain time frame, Mr. Young, on your motion? We'll get,
I was thinking about 1 month. That would give us time to, the public to have a say, but also all of council members to be able to submit their thoughts, ideas, and also give us a little bit more time to see what's happened in other cities and what might be part of it. So about 30 days.
okay, so a motion by Mr. Young to postpone the discussion approximately 30 days, and a second by Mr. Fantini. Any additional discussion on that motion? Everybody understand what that motion is on council? Mr. Franciac, will you take the vote on that motion, please?
Mr. Walters. Ms. Cleland McGrath.
No.
Ms. Moulton.
No.
Mr. McDougall.
No.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Okay, thank you for that. Now the motion that, I have a motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Ms. Cleland McGrath to adopt ordinance 4071. Any additional discussion there? Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
No.
Mr. Young.
No.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for testing my Roberts Rules. I think I may not go to Roberts Rules jail, and we'll move on to item 6C, which is ordinance 4072, consideration of Planning Commission recommendation to amend AMC 1949, non-conforming uses and structures to provide for alterations and additions to non-conforming buildings. This is a discussion item, possible action, and open for public comment. And Ms. Grange.
Thank you, Mayor. So yes, so this proposal is to allow non-conforming historic structures that are listed on the any historic register, city, local, local, state, or federal, to be rebuilt or restored to the pre-existing non-conforming configuration. And the intent is to provide for flexibility for additions or alterations to promote investment in adaptive reuse of historic structures while making sure that the historic character is maintained. The change in the Anacortes Municipal Code would be to AMC 1949-040, which is the section that talks about enlargement, alteration, reconstruction of non-conforming buildings and structures. And so the change would just add a new section at the end of this, or subsection at the end of this section that would address altering, adding onto, repairing, or restoring those non-conforming historic structures. The background with this is that currently, so a non-conforming building is basically a building that was constructed, was legally established, but it doesn't comply with current zoning standards. So maybe it doesn't meet setbacks, or it's over height, or you know, what is required, what would be required today to build a building. With those non-conforming structures, there are certain allowances for maintaining them, restoring or replacing them if they are destroyed by fire or other natural occurrence. But the structure first would need to look at coming into conformance with the current standards, and unless it would cause a reduction in the building size, and then it could be rebuilt to its pre-existing condition. And then finally, additions are permitted to non-conforming structures provided that they meet the current standards. So the concern that came up was that some of these restrictions on restoring and adding on to non-conforming historic structures may conflict with the city's historic preservation goals. So that's why staff took a look at you know, providing for some flexibility in the code to be able to you know, add on, restore, and repair so that these structures can be preserved, and not limiting, you know, what is able to be done to them artificially. Just an example is the Olson building on 3rd and Commercial Avenue. This is in the manufacturing and shipping zone, which has a 10-foot building setback from the commercial street and 3rd Street. So if this building were to be demolished, it would need to conform to today's setbacks, which would be 10 feet, so it couldn't be built right along the street.
Mr. Walters.
Could you repeat precisely what the problem is there? You just said it, but can you repeat that?
The setback requirements for the manufacturing and shipping zone are 10 feet. So if this building were to be destroyed, then it would need to, if it were wanted to be rebuilt, it would need to comply with the 10-foot setback requirements.
And what distance is it at now?
0. It's right on the property line.
Oh, it's right on the property line.
Yes.
From the parking strip, it is.
So it would have to be rebuilt 10 feet back
Yes.
from that yellow line.
I'm sorry for not being clear. Yes.
And to be clear, the plan for the Olson building is not to destroy it and rebuild it.
I did not mean to.
But to preserve the
Yes.
facade and largely reconstruct everything on the inside.
Correct. And to add on to the, yes, to go up. Correct. And so that is another item that we looked at, the ability to add on to a non-conforming structure. The addition would have to also comply with that 10-foot setback requirement. So the public comments that we received on this proposal, there was one in support. We also worked with the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and they were kind enough to suggest some edits to our proposal to make sure that the language was consistent with the international existing building code, which the city does adopt. And so we were thankful for that. The Planning Commission, after the public hearing, proposed adoption of the amendments as presented. And that's the extent of my presentation on that one.
Okay, any
Answer
immediate questions for Ms. Grage? Any member of the public wish to comment on this one? All right, council discussion. Perhaps the least controversial of the items? I'm not sure anymore. Mr.
Mayor Miller?
Walters?
I really appreciate the work that the planning department did here and the initiative that they've demonstrated to make this change, to support this project and potentially other projects to help ensure that we do have historic buildings in our downtown going forward. It's when we find problems in the code, we should fix them, and this is an example of that. So I move adoption of the ordinance as presented.
Second.
Yeah, motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. Fantini to adopt ordinance 4072, amending AMC 1949 nonconforming uses and structures to provide for the alteration, addition, repair, and restoration of nonconforming historic buildings and structures. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next up is item 6D, interlocal agreement for grant funding for the 2025 periodic comprehensive plan update. Ms. Grage?
Still me.
Yeah. I knew it was going to be somebody from planning.
Thank you, Mayor. So yes, on a different but totally related topic, I guess, to what we've been talking about. So the background on this is that Anacortes must review and, if needed, revise our comprehensive plan and development regulations by June 30th, 2025. Talked about that a couple times tonight. The Washington State Legislature provided funding for jurisdictions that have due dates in 2025 based on a population formula. Anacortes is eligible for $125,000 in grant funding to help with completing this update work. And in your packet, in the contract, you'll find a scope of work and budget that was estimated by staff based on fiscal year. So the funding is only available, half of the funding is available in the 2024 state fiscal year. Is that the right term? And the other half is available from the next fiscal year. Sorry, I don't know that right, the correct term there. And then additional staff is currently working with the Department of Commerce for grant funding on the climate element of the comprehensive plan, which is a new requirement under the Growth Management Act. So that funding will be up to $500,000. So you'll expect to be seeing something on that relatively soon. And this one's quick. So the staff recommendation is that the City Council authorize the mayor to execute the interlocal agreement between the City of Anacortes and the Washington State Department of Commerce.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, usually not controversial to receive grant funds, but council, any questions? Yeah, these are interlocal contracts, so typically we don't take public comment on that, but because we can't have you rewriting contracts. Yeah, that's the job of council. So, and I think you give me a head nod, City Attorney. Thank you. That's why
Mayor
we don't.
Miller?
Yep. Mr. Walters.
Do we have somebody interested in public comment?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, come on. All right. Council wants to hear it. So we won't rewrite the contract based on your comments without running it back through the city attorney.
Brian Wetcher, Anacortes. Please don't rewrite the contract. I just would point out that the Anacortes Community Forest Lands Advisory Board has already started their review process, and we're at least 6 months into it right now for our comp plan update. We kind of urged that along because it took us 8 years to approve the last update. So I just wondered if any of this money would be available for use in that comp plan update, because the document itself needs a new structure, not necessarily, not arguing about what's in the document as regulatory or advisory, but the document itself needs new structure, and it might be really good to have professional help in doing that. So I just wondered if any of that grant money would be available for that, our ongoing process. We are moving into the much more definitive process right now, and we hope to have a document in front of you that's been approved by the public by 2025 spring.
Thank you. And I probably should have mentioned that this is somewhat related to the next topic that we have on the agenda, the actual contract. I didn't mention the interlocal agreement for the receiving the grant funds, and then the contract award for the 2025 periodic plan. But we'll take them one at a time. Council.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So this agreement that's before us is the interlocal from the Department of Commerce, which is constrained explicitly to the 2025 comprehensive plan update. It's fairly ordinary that jurisdictions get money to fund their comprehensive plan updates, but it does have bookends around what it can be used for. I move approval of the interlocal agreement as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Young to approve the interlocal agreement between City of Anacortes and Washington State Department of Commerce as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac?
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, now is item 6E, and this is Contract Award 2025 Periodic Comprehensive Plan Update. Ms. Grage, I think you're still just going to be all
Last
night.
one.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Thank you. Yes, so on this contract, city staff is seeking council approval of a contract award in the amount of $100,000 to Makers Urban Design and Architecture to help us with updating the comprehensive plan consistent with the Growth Management Act requirements. You may recall that Makers previously worked on the 2016 comprehensive plan update and then the 2019 development regulation update, and then more recently the housing action plan in 2023. So they are very familiar with the issues in Anacortes, and confident they'll do a good job helping us on this new update. And so the proposed contract scope of work is listed obviously in the contract, but I don't think I'll read through these unless somebody has a specific question about any of these tasks.
Okay, questions for Ms. Grage or planning staff?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
We did get one public comment on this suggesting that we should expand the public participation program. This is not the public participation program. This is just the contract for the work that the consultant is going to do. The public participation program comes later and is generated hopefully with consultation with the consultant who's going to do a bunch of the work, but also city staff are going to do most of the public process component, right?
Correct.
So the scope as described here, I think, is flexible enough to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish and hits the other important components. Notably, climate is going to be a separate contract. That's a new required element, but we're getting new and different money for that. So that makes me feel good. One of the things that is in here is some information about Sharp's Corner, because we're going to do some analysis of what kind of housing could be supported by city-owned property at Sharp's Corner. I like that. And then there was one other component that obviously the new housing element will be a big deal because of all the new requirements from the state for our periodic update. I just wanted to make one point about that, and that is, we did the housing action plan a year or so ago now. We adopted the housing action plan, but in the adopting resolution, we did say, this is a menu of options. We're not committing to do all the things in the housing action plan. So I am very hopeful that we will vet those in more detail before including them in a proposal, because some of them may not really be things that City Council wants to do. On the other hand, when you look at the menu, you might find that some of them are very important to achieve the housing goals. So I hope we can continue to have an interactive conversation about that as we move through the update. And I move approval of the contract as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. McDougall to approve the contract award for 2025 Periodic Comprehensive Plan Update 24036 PLA 001. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, 15 more items on the agenda. Oh, no, just kidding, 3. Item 6F, contract modification, Commercial Avenue Corridor Plan, Phase 1, 11th Street to 13th Street. And this is a design contract, and Mr. Rayum is here.
Mayor,
so
Council.
We're over to Public Works.
Yep. Mayor, good evening, Mayor, Council, Andy Rayum, Public Works Director. Before you, this contract is with Alta Engineering to take the 30% design to 60% design for the segment. Well, it's the phase 1 of the Commercial Avenue rebuild, basically from 11th to 13th, which includes a roundabout at 12th. The 60% design will help us solidify the channelization and really the layout of the surveyed design, in which we can then start working on property acquisition, as well as kind of work with WashDOT to approve our channelization plan. The funding for this is all grant funding. One of them is the Washington Department of Transportation Bike and Pedestrian Grant, as well as a TIB grant. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, well, I know there's going to be questions from council, so
Yep.
Council questions. Or maybe not.
They might be worn out. I wouldn't blame them.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. I am so looking forward to seeing what this design comes to be. I still struggle with trying to understand how this could be much more efficient. And so I'm simply looking forward to having a in-depth discussion about the design, first of all, but then secondarily to that, making sure that it's efficient. I'm sure that that will be down the road, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'm really looking forward to it, because I've struggled with this analysis from the very beginning, and given the size that it will be or might possibly be, I'm not an engineer, so again, I'm very hopeful that we have a suitable solution. And this doesn't fall on you, Mr. Rayum. I'm just saying that I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Oh, I feel it falls on me, to be honest with you. Yeah, I have some concerns about this project as well, so I am going to have Ulta consultants come in and meet with me, and we'll probably have them come back here too when we have a 60% design done. Can't really, at 30% it's kind of conceptual. It's a little more than conceptual, but 60% is real. So then keep in mind as well, this is phase one of multiple phases that will rebuild Commercial Avenue from this location all the way up to the roundabout to head on out of town of the south end of Commercial. So this is a big deal. It kind of sets the stage for multiple projects down the road.
Just for clarity purposes too, I totally agree about 11th and 13th. That corridor itself has been in need of a fluffing, if you would, and but also again the southern end, too, needs work. But so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
We had a good discussion in the Public Works Committee meeting last week that I think you weren't there for, about some of the outstanding questions about the project, reiterating some of the points that we made under a prior Public Works Director, maybe 2 Public Works Directors ago. We need to resolve the question of what changes get made to the Safeway parking lot, if any. It's not part of the project and it's not public property, but something needs to change there to facilitate this, or potentially allow entrance into the intersection, but maybe not exit, or the reverse on that east leg of the roundabout. Those questions somehow need to get resolved. And then also what happens at 11th and Commercial, because we've got some traffic problems there, and how do we ensure that with a steady stream of traffic coming out of the roundabout, we don't make that worse? Those types of things, I'm hopeful that we'll get some treatment in the 60% design so that we can get to a point where some of those questions are answered, and we explore some maybe still alternatives, maybe alternatives that should have been explored at the 30% design level, to figure out how we can make sure that this will be an improvement for cars flowing through that intersection. So I'm supportive of moving this forward so that we can get those answers, along with all the others that this is really targeted at.
Yeah, we know this is a big one, so we will be keeping council informed and the public every step of the way.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Fantini.
do you know when they'll anticipate coming back with the 60% design?
I should have had that in my back pocket. The mayor told me to be. So I would assume late spring, early summer, we'll have it back.
Thank you.
I could ask him to come sooner to council. I'm going to sit down with them and
That's the most frequent question I get at my job is, when are they going to tell us what's going on down there? So I know a lot of people will be interested to hear.
It should go pretty quick.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we'll be finding out things along the way before it's 60%. I know you said that already, but these questions are kind of burning questions that we have, that many of our constituents have. So I will just say in advance, I appreciate that we will be updated on a regular basis and have the opportunity to converse.
Yeah, I plan to bring it to committee as soon as I talk to Alta, and then if you guys feel appropriate, we'll bring it to the full council just to give a full update, or we can do emails as well. But yeah, I'm tracking this one.
Great, thank you.
It's only the most visible intersection in all of Anacortes, but
yeah. Well, it only sets in play about $65 million of investment in the entire corridor. So this is the first step, and we just need to make sure we do it right.
Other questions for Mr. Ram?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I move approval or authorization for the mayor to sign the contract modification.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. Young to approve the contract modification for Commercial Avenue Corridor Plan Phase 1, 11th Street to 13th Street as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, item 6G has contract award, replacement of fire truck. number 220, and this is a discussion item, possible action. And Mr. Rayam.
Again, Mayor, Council, I'm here tonight to present to you a request to purchase a truck to replace truck number 220, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you. It's a 2006 Pierce fire engine. I did bring the fire chief here with me. Oh, there he is. Good. Just in case you have some questions. So this is a planned replacement. The truck's over 20 years old. It takes 46 months to get a truck, so ordering it now, we would anticipate the truck in about 2 years, so 2027. At that time, we will have lapsed with our insurance. We'll receive 0 credits because it's over the age of 25. Not a huge deal, but just so you guys are aware, it's definitely overdue. We're a little behind the 8 ball just because of the extreme lag time it takes to actually build out a fire engine this day and age. So, yeah, it's a $1.1 million piece of equipment, and if we order it now, we'll get it in a couple years.
Yeah, it's just amazing the 50-month time lag. But okay, questions for Mr. Ram?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Well, so 46 months isn't a couple years, though. It's going on 5 years, right? I mean, it's.
No, we're not paying.
Do we need to subscribe to Prime for
We're
this?
not paying for that.
Maybe I should have done the math on my notes I got here. Let's see.
Yeah.
So is it 1 to 2 years, or is it 46 to 50 months?
Is it 46? It's 46, so it's not
Yikes.
1 to 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 46 months is a little more.
Well, we better get started. I guess my only question, you answered it. The cover memo says it's a standard 20-year replacement, but you answered that it's really, we're at 25 years, so it's due on the schedule. And do we have money in ER&R as we're supposed to if the system is working to fund it?
Yes, we do for this fire engine.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
Not to be confused with the other one that we're trying to potentially buy with FEMA money.
Ladder truck, you mean?
Yes.
Is it a ladder?
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Ladder truck.
Yeah, this is a different one. Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
I move that we authorize the mayor to sign the contract with Hughes Fire Equipment as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Walters, second by Mr. Fantini to approve the contract award for the replacement of fire truck number 220, 24037 ER&R 001. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac?
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland-McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, item 6H, and this is the last item on the agenda, contract award for general sewer plan, and this is still Public Works. Mr. Rayum.
Yeah, it's a planning type of evening, so this is Public Works version of planning. So we need to develop a general sewer plan. The last general sewer plan was developed in 2015, so pretty out of date. This go at it will include a hydraulic model of the sewer system, so we'll know about the capacities and size, and we'll be able to project out and make sure we can support the population growth for the comprehensive plan. So you'll see multiples of these, and I'll keep bringing it up. The Public Works is coming with each utility with a comprehensive plan, a master plan for each of the utilities, so that we can inform the capital facilities element of the comprehensive plan for the city with some pretty hard numbers and some good information so we know what it's going to cost to support. Well, we'll know what our existing deficiencies are as well as what we need to build to support future development. So this is just shy of $500,000. So there's a 3-year, 30,000 of it in a management reserve. It will produce like I said, a model. We are collecting pretty good amount of flow data to make sure models can lie. And so what you want to do is have real live data to test the model to make sure it's calibrated and it works properly. So you'll have a good model that'll last you for some time into the future, a good 10, 20 years. So that's it. That's what I have.
Questions, contracts in the packet. Questions for Mr. Rayum?
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
We talked about this at some length in the Public Works Committee meeting last week, and it's really going to be a great tool that we have in order to address the needs that we have and that we will have. And it is, it's going to help us as a city. It's going to help us spend money. It's going to help us save money, and it's going to help us meet the needs. So I think it's just great that we're going to do this. And thank you, Mr. Ram, for taking charge of this and moving it forward. And I move that we authorize the mayor to sign the contract with HDR Engineering in the amount of $492,571 for the development of the general sewer plan.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Moulton, second by Mr. Young to approve the contract with HDR Engineering in the amount of $492,571 for development of the general sewer plan. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
Question about task 1000, which is the collection system surveying. The work that's identified in the contract to survey portions of the sewer system, is that work that hasn't already been done by our crews inputting data into the cartographs system? Number one, has it already been done? And number two, if not, and we need to do it, can we get it and put it into the cartograph system?
So when they said surveying in there, I'm not quite sure what they said in the contract, but there's two things. So they could be conflating surveying as actually monitoring and seeing what the real flows are in the system. We do closed caption television footage of the sewer system. You guys ever want to watch some of it? It can be entertaining at times. But they do check the pipe integrity from the inside of the pipe to make sure that we know the health of the pipe system. In addition, so they're going to take that data as well as they're going to do a survey of the pump stations, as well as the treatment plant. So that is all going to be included in the general sewer plan. So we know what we need to build for capacity purposes and for parts that need to be replaced due to aging infrastructure.
Yeah, some of it is called out as collecting sewer structure survey, rim elevations, invert elevations, pipe sizes, and material. I thought a lot of those things were already captured in our cartograph system.
We do have a really good GIS system. There are errors though, so sometimes when they model, it'll look like the water's going the wrong direction, and that's because we have the inverts wrong. So then they'll go out and shoot the elevation and make sure we get the model will be calibrated.
My hope is just that we make use of data that we've already spent time collecting, but also that we don't pay a consultant to collect data that then they use to generate recommendations or projects or a model, but don't give us. We should get that data as well.
I believe there was a task. I made sure there was a task that any corrections to our GIS data and cartograph data needs to be recirculated back to us so that we can make those corrections.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, there's a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Young to approve the contract as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac?
Ms. Cleland-McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Being no further business before the council, I will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thanks for the work.